Okay, cool. Well, I'm gonna get started, guys. Okay, so we had a couple questions about. I'm gonna start with the mediums and substrates topic, and then we'll go to the tissue culture ones in a minute. I hope we have Wags here because he had a lot of questions. I'm not sure we do. Um, okay, so the first question we had from LTR Buck was: if you're growing in cocoa coir or peat using salts, do you add microbe? Do microbes add any benefit? Um, And yes, they do. This is a really interesting topic because you definitely microbes need something to like feed off of, right? So microbes do a lot better in substrates that have an organic component to them and have some amount of breakdown going on in the root zone. Um, but they can work in just a solution, so no substrate at all, or Rockwool or any other substrate. They're just not quite as they're not going to proliferate quite as well. So microbes can feed on something called exudate, which comes out of the roots, and roots will actually kind of emit sugary substances to feed soil microbes and create that symbiotic relationship so that the microbes actually grow like on the outside of the roots. Um, when you're using a cocoa or a peat, because it's an organic basis, those those uh those microbes can feed off the slow but in gradual but like still there breakdown of the cocoa coir or peat, better than like a rock wool that's not breaking down at all because it's just inorganic. So microbes do add a benefit. And what do they do? They can increase water absorption. They can prevent drying out somewhat. So they can kind of like the level of soil, like essentially if you had two pots, one inoculated and one non inoculated, you might have the inoculated one be a little more resistant to wilting than the other one. And then also if you're flowering, microbes can have an impact on terpene and aroma profile, production, overall production. And I don't think the mechanism is quite known exactly how that works, but it does seem to be that organic growers that provide organic inputs and have inoculations tend to have a lot more terpene, and the like sun-grown organic soil people have the most amount of terpenes by a large margin. I've seen like, 28%, 30% THC with like a 4% terp. I don't like no one's really able to accomplish that indoors unless you're using a living soil component. ARC, could you okay, not okay, you're in. Great. Um cool. So I hope that answers that question. Wags asked, do you guys think that we can achieve same bud quality in terms of trichomes, density, and bud appeal in different growing mediums under the same light and environment? Absolutely, you can. You can do hydroponics, you can do cocoa, you can do living soil, you can do peat based, you can do rockwool. All of those require slightly different inputs, and I'd say how you irrigate them and what nutrients you use is going to be the difference maker to accomplish high quality in any of those grow styles. None of those grow styles are excluded in high quality. It'll just be how you get used to them. And honestly, a biggest piece of that is just familiarity. So one, it's tempting to be like, I didn't do well with this, to move to another, move to another, move to another. I would strongly recommend sticking, if you feel good about one, sticking with one and getting used to it. Cocoa is my favorite and I think the most forgiving. Okay, so Wags also asked, is the only difference, was there a question here? Is the only difference between peat moss based soil, cocoa perlite, or DWC the cost, production, and yield of the biomass in the end, or can they also affect quality? Absolutely, it can affect quality. But again, it's all about how you irrigate it and what nutrients you use. So, um, like cannabis growing requires so many different factors to click. So I wouldn't say that substrate is one that is like, oh, this one is better quality than that one. It's simply how you treat it and how you can manipulate the plant as far as EC, drybacks, irrigation, and then type of nutrient solution that you're using. Um, Overall, there's definitely costs and benefits to all of them. Rockwool being you can only use inorganic salts and it doesn't work with microbes as well, but it's easy to irrigate properly. Um, Cocoa perlite is the most forgiving in my opinion. Peat moss, I don't love. It can hold on to too much saturation, doesn't breathe as nicely. And then to wrap up the medians and substrates, another question from Wags. Are perlite or any other stones included in your cocoa mix for indoor automatic two-way drip irrigation? Yeah, perlite is included in soil to increase the porosity of the soil. So one thing this is an interesting factoid about soil mixtures is a mixture is actually a chemical, like a chemistry term, like a mixture, and gunpowder is a mixture. It's like a bunch of stuff put together and it doesn't react chemically. It's just complex together, like mixed together, and it has different properties than any of the two alone. So it is important to have your perlite mixed in, and when it does the mix that in, it creates a lot more oxygenation and porosity than usual. Uh, oh, cool. We got a nice crowd in here tonight. Thank you guys so much for coming. Um, let's get to some hard hitting tissue culture questions. Cool. We're on to tissue culture now. 503 King asked, have you ever experienced genetic drift with a cultivar that you've had cloned before or before you were able to keep everything as TC? Okay, so let me address something that is a really common usage of words. Genetic drift is not the word you're looking for here, but a lot of people use this kind of colloquially in cannabis. Genetic drift is a phenomenon that is a population genetics or evolutionary biology term that's meant to signify a change in population demographics or like allele frequency in a population based on not by like evolution, like sexual selection, but by like random selection. So that would be like having more blue-eyed people in a country because first, just randomly, a lot of old people passed away who had blue eyes, and therefore now there's just more brown eyes. Like that's just a shift in a population. So genetic drift, like we talk about it, is actually a word of somoclonal variation. So I'm gonna put that in the chat too. Guys, I always forget to. Okay, in the Grauer questions chat, because that's what you want to look at, because that's like really what we're talking about here. Um, and somoclonal variation is absolutely something that can happen. In a plant, you can get different expressions from the same genetics. And another version of that would just be like aging or the way that our bodies can change over time, whether that be like changing in your skin complexion or tone, or like balding, or like changes of eye color or hair color. Same DNA, we're not like mutating, but we're changing that expression over time in a subtle way. And that can be subject to a lot of factors. The thing that you want to look up if you want to learn more about this is epigenetics. And epigenetics is how the factors that are in our environment contributing to the same DNA being expressed a little differently. This can happen in a plant. So, yes, we have experienced that before. And one of the classic ways that we've experienced somoclonal variation or change of expression of a plant is when we flower it and then unflower it and then reflower it and unflower it, or if a plant is very prone to like flowering outside of a 12-12 cycle, which can happen with stress, the plant can start to like behave kind of like wonkily. If you've ever tried to re-veg a plant, you'll know that like the plant just kind of like sits around for a long time. Photoperiodism, which has to do with all these cues and ways the plant reacts to photo to demonstrate like, oh, should I create flowers and should I die now? Should I senesce? All those things uh, really messes with the proper expression of the plant. So most of the issues we've had in TC and outside of TC have been related to flowering confusion in the plant or like overexposure to a mixed signals there. Um, And we have had that, yeah, in TC and not in TC. I have not created a genetic basis for actual genetic changes related to that. I can't answer that, but it is possible. Um, okay, Lightning Wolf asks, does TC cure the plant when it's already infected with disease and unseen bugs? The answer to that is a resounding yes, it does. That's the whole point of tissue culture. And the smaller the dissection you do, the more likely you are to cure it. So when you do node segments, which is kind of like the cheat way to do tissue culture, instead of a meristem dissection, which is a much more difficult way to do it, you're risking little bits of a bacterial or fungal disease or like insect eggs just being on or inside the stem. And unfortunately, bacteria and fungi can actually live inside the stem of the plant. Humans have the same phenomenon where you can get, if you have a heart attack, it's usually caused by a thrombus, which is like a little bit of, like lipids and like a little fat, like a little nodule of fat that then detaches and clogs an artery. That's usually caused by bacteria in your bloodstream or a little infection that then the lipids all gather around. So that same thing can happen in a plant, and you can have things like fusarium or pythium living inside the stem of the plant. You guys might have cut a sick plant before and seen brown strip inside the stem. That's probably your fusarium or your pythium. And if you can imagine, you take that small dissection and put it in tissue culture, it's still going to have that. It's still going to be sick. Therefore, you need to take a really tiny dissection, and the tinier you do it, the more likely it is to be clean. We go through a process at the laboratory where we index for disease. So once we've done the dissection, we're now looking for the next 2 or 3 months. Show me, show me, show me. Is it sick during that period of time? And that's what we're trying to uh, address. So I'm looking at my notes here. ARC, I see that there's some comments coming in too. If you could help me track those, if there's any new or expansions on those questions or anything, I'd appreciate your help there. Okay, perfect. Okay, another tissue culture question. Dark. I said dank soldier. Dark soldier 300. Regarding tissue culture, how would one store samples? How long are they good for if kept sterile? Can you turn the culture back into a plant? This is a very heavy question as well because there's a lot of different techniques and a lot of different ways to do this. So you can refrigerate plants and keep them cold. Cold plants reduce their metabolism and they just go in slow motion. So it's a great way to store them. However, there is some difficulty in doing that. We have stored plants in the refrigerator for over a year without touching them. We're able to get them back. It's pretty cool. Um, how you store them, whether you add light to them, what substrate they're in, what media they're in, what size of the media it's in, the humidity and temperature of the refrigerator. All of those factors contribute to that. Um, but we've also kept sterile cultures for over 5 years now, so we can keep them a very long time. Um, Related back to that somoclonal variation question, some of the oldest cultures we've kept are most likely to have some of those issues with flowering, stress, like not expressing right, and that's where we kind of have to bring them back to health, or observe them very closely, or just retire them. So it's kind of a mixed bag. We're able to keep them pretty consistently for about 3 years, but I think we're starting to push it at 4 or 5 years. Um, okay, cool. Well, that's all the TC questions we have right now. Terpenes. Okay, there's some really cool stuff here too. What are some of the most crucial ways you can improve terpene production? Um, Terpenes are based on stress for the plant and are really manipulated with living soil complexes and the soil microbiome. So what do I mean by that? Inoculants are important, but also things like compost teas and other soil amendments can definitely boost terpenes. There's a lot of hydro store products out there that are like kind of snake oil, like just kind of not really there. But some of them do work, and many of the living soil, the amendments that are worm castings based, humic acid based, fulvic acid based, can definitely improve terpene production. Many of these actually are just PK boosters. And when you see PK boosters, that's potassium and phosphorus. Uh, and the ratio of nitrogen to potassium and phosphorus later or like mid to late flower is very important for creating proper cannabinoid and terpene expression in the plant. So many of those are actually just uh, and typically if you think about that too, if you have a two-part nutrient line, is usually part one and part two, and part one is usually calcium nitrate, so it's really based on your nitrogen source. And then part two is usually a mixture of potassium and phosphorus salts, as well as some other things. So really your part two nutrient is going to be your PK. So honestly, when you buy some of these expensive hydro store items, you're honestly just adding more like second ingredient, like part two nutrient. Uh, and it's a little more complicated than that, and there's other factors at play. But I have seen people be successful by just leaning towards more of their part two nutrient later in the growing cycle. Watch out for that. Depending on how it's formulated, you might get micronutrient imbalances and stuff like that. But increasing the ratio of phosphorus and potassium late in flower and reducing the amount of nitrogen in flower, late in flower, definitely helps to boost both terpenes and cannabinoids and creates a more finished look to the flower with trichome density. So I hope that answers your question. That's a very understudied uh, part of the whole grow world right now. Okay, collective consciousness asks, how do you achieve the maximum terpene concentration for hydroponics? Cocoa irrigated with Athena Pro nutrients. Indoor grow besides genetics and proper drying and curing. Do microbes like, so this is a very similar question to the first one. Do microbes like Bacillus and Pseudomonas and others help as close to organic grown buds as possible? Slightly extra potassium sulfate, seaweed extracts, lactic acid? What's the most important factor? Okay, so genetics are extremely important here, but there is a huge variability within the same clone in how much terpene and aroma expression you can get. So collective consciousness is you're onto all of those things. Absolutely, using soil inoculants like bacillus is that's a good way to start. But I would say using compost teas are a really great way to like introduce that into it, and it's somewhat easy because you can just hand mix them and add them. You are That's not something you can improve late in flower. This is a pretty important part of this. Okay, it's week 7 and you're trying to improve your terp. Guys, whatever you do with this plant now is going to make an impact about 3 weeks later. So really you should be doing your compost teas and trying to be like, I should improve my terp between weeks like 3 and 6. Not weeks 7, 8, 9. 7, 8, 9 is just about maturation of the bud. Dye is cast, like whatever terpenes and precursors are there are gonna be there. So that would be those late stages would be reducing nitrogen and increasing phosphorus and potassium. So absolutely, seaweed extracts are not going to improve that. Seaweed extracts are more about the what's it called? Like cytokinins in them that help the branching and like vegetative growth. So I wouldn't use that like later. It's not going to increase terpene, but definitely your biggest factors for terpene are overall health. Um, you also have environmental stuff. Terpenes are volatile. So if you're able to get your temperatures down and your VPDs proper, that's going to be a really big factor because one of the worst ways to have a, hay smelling crop, even if you do things right, is if it's too hot and too humid late in flower, right? And everything just kind of like blows off and isn't good. So if you can lower your temperatures, that's another really great way to preserve your terpenes. Proper drying and curing is very important, and a soil complex that is both the right nutrition and manipulating that nitrogen to phosphorus and potassium is super important for terp expression. Um, I'll talk about the high. high stress actually increases terps a lot. And again, I've seen like 4% terps mostly on outdoor grows that have cold nights, that have living soil complexes, have wind and weather and insects and soil microbes, and have a whole like Charlotte's Web vibe there. So I do think there's a lot more research to be done to have the indoor growers catch up with the terp of the living soil guys, big time. Um, okay, onto some breeding questions. I'm curious how you build relationship with other breeders. Do you keep an open line of communication and help each other trade cuts? I've seen Soulfire running Gastropop and Utter Madness. Okay, so a big piece of this, I would say one of the biggest pieces of maintaining relationship with breeders, a big part of this is like in-person stuff, like going to the events and kind of like being out there and just meeting people and being a cool guy and just wanting to session and hang out. That like coming to the events, coming to the talks, going to things like the big expos and everything. Usually the breeders are there and oftentimes they're under the radar just, working the booth or just hanging out. And just hanging out with them is one of the best ways to create contacts. But I will say that there's a lot of things that create lasting relationships with breeders for collabs. One of them is doing good business. Another part of them is being open and using proper attribution. Meaning like if you use their cut in a pollination, like shouting out to them and be like, "Hey, do you want some seeds? Hey, can I bring you into this deal where we're selling a clone? Can we work together on this? Can we talk about this?" That's such a huge part of retaining and creating relationships with other breeders. Um, and there's also like a code of ethics there in a way, which is like don't use the cut unless you have the relationship. Don't reverse a plant that you didn't hunt. Uh yeah, don't make a seed line of something that you didn't make already. Like if you just buy someone else's seed and then make a seed line from that, that's not like don't sell seeds of something that you didn't really make. Um Following those things will help keep you plugged into the community. And as far as Soulfire goes, I don't know Soulfire, and I'm not sure where they got the gastropop. They could have just hunted the seeds, but I'm waiting for a call or text from them. So if you know Soulfire, love to talk to them about using gastropop. I don't know about them using that cut. So hey, um, okay. So 503 King, when trying to stabilize a trait in a strain, how do you know when you've locked it in? Okay, well it's a two step process. When you say in a strain, do you mean in a seed line or in a clone? Because in a clone, once you have a trait, you got a trait. The only thing would be if you test it in other environments and it doesn't always show that trait. Eh, well then it's not very locked in, is it? But typically when I see stabilize, I'm thinking of a seed line. So the way you know you've locked that in is when you do the testing of the seeds. And the testing of the seeds should be, a minimum of like 25 plants that you bring to flower all the way to the end so that you can look at the whole population. And if 23 of the 25 plants have that expression, well, you've locked it in. Like this, that's how it grows. Just because the probability likelihood that that's like a coin flip on a trait and you just happen to get 23 or 25 is extremely unlikely. So, yeah, so that's how you do it. You just have to test the seeds. Um, if you're just talking about a trait as well, and you want to lock that in, again, it's all about looking at the traits of the progeny when you run when you run like a bunch of seeds, and you have to run. You definitely can't do that without at least like 10, or else the statistics of the allele frequencies. That's another thing if you want to get to uh, evolutionary biology or some stuff to look up. Allele frequencies is another way that you can quantify and use mathematics to determine how stable a trait is. Um, so there is some fancy mathematics actually on calculating how often a trait comes up to determining how stable it is in a lot. So that's what we do though, is just test the seeds. Um, Scientific data behind the statement that regular seeds are more stable than fem. I don't think that there's scientific basis around that. We've talked about this before. That I think it's just all about the plant you select. Um, but there is a evolutionary pressure that makes it more likely. that so this is an interesting factoid. If you make feminized seeds, you need to reverse the female, meaning that you expose it to something that absorbs ethylene gas and it makes and that makes male flowers, right? Successful plants that successfully reverse are also sensitive enough to that ethylene absorption that they make male flowers. So add that up. What is a herm? It's a spontaneous production of a male flower. So there could be that like the easier it is to reverse a female, also it has some built-in machinery that makes it slightly more likely to herm. That is a possibility. So I don't think it's been proven, but it's all about ethylene sensitivity in the end, which is something that should be investigated more in the genetics of cannabis. It's pretty interesting stuff. Um, okay, excuse me. Dankness, if you breed with a feminized plant with a regular male, I know the seeds come out of regs, but that increase the chances you'll get females. Nope, it does not increase the chances you'll get females because the way that works is you'll do two X chromosomes uh, by an XY chromosome, and you'll have the same frequency there. Sex in plants is a little more complicated than that, but that's still how it manifests that you're not going to get more females from a fem plant that you hit with like regular pollen or something. It'll be the same. Um, okay, so lighting. Okay, let's get to something I don't know that much about. Are blurple lights bad? Yes. Next question. No. Blurple lights tend to have too much surprisingly, I think, blue spectrum in them. So typically the blurple lights or like both. Okay, guys, you want more blue light and you want more balanced spectrum in the vegetative phase, and you want more red light in the generative phase or flowering phase. If you think about that, that's why a lot of people use ceramic metal halides for their veg. Well, this is kind of old school. I guess I'm dating myself. Ceramic metal halides with veg and high pressure sodium with flour. One, just you can just use your eyes. The color temperature of the metal halides is much more blue than the color temperature of the HPSs. So typically, color temperature of veg lights is between 6,000 to 9,000 K Kelvin, um, and your flowering lights are going to be more towards red. And the reason behind that is that there's more generative response to red and more vegetative response to blue. So blurple lights are typically used, in my experience, in veg, which does not, which typically gives them like a lot of stress response. So use blue lights in veg. I'll give you guys a little life hack. You don't need fancy lights for like cloning in veg necessarily, and you can get by with any light that's 6,500 and 9,000 Kelvin. Um, so uh, so that's one way you can get around that, but I would not use blurple lights. It's definitely just not good for the plants. Um, okay, preferred in light intensity and how it changes throughout flowering. Okay, so I would say that first in veg, the best growers with the best yield are between like 500 to 750 ppfd in veg. Wow, that's kind of high. Um, but that's where you're building your yield and really strong foundation of a plant that's going to make you big, big, strong buds in a happy plant. In flower, you're looking at between 800 to 1100 ppfd is the range there. You know, as far as changing it throughout the cycle, I would say the only real change throughout the cycle is at the very end, where you can get away with not juicing it with super, super high ppfd. And between the weeks of 8 and 9, I would be focused more on having a really good environmental like set points and hitting your VPD targets really well to avoid things like bud rot, right? Than having your light intensity be super high. So if you're gonna taper off light, it's at the end. Other than that, you're gonna be trying to hit these like high ppfd numbers starting in veg of above 500 ppfd, and then get maintaining 800 to 1100 throughout flowering with slight taper off at the end. That's my experience. Okay, UVA UVB lights. What's your experience with UVA UVB lights? Okay, so not much. I do know that a lot of lighting companies are including some UV spectra, and that it's something that has to do with stress response and terpene expression and secondary metabolites and stuff like that. Um, so I think that's very interesting. I am not an expert on that, so I'd recommend going on some of the websites of something like Fluence is really interested in those topics. The other thing would be UVA or UVB for like sterilization purposes, and I'm totally not for using UV light at all for sterilization. It just doesn't work that well, and that's in the scientific community as a whole. People are really getting away from that. Um, okay, general questions. Tommy Lee, will Compound Genetics be restocking their acai berry gelato? No, we will not be doing that. We don't have the clone of acai berry gelato that was used in the pollination. So that is a very, if you have packs of those, I'd recommend holding on to them or you know trading for them or hunting them now because they're rare packs, guys. We're not going to see that for a long time, I don't think. Um, just want to know more about growing details for your strain Total Eclipse. I'll put a little bit of like a summary up there. I think we have some resources on the compound website and stuff like that. But this is a really cool cross of our gastropop in our gastropop uh, pollination, which I'm sure you know about gastropop, um, as well as the uh, Kingslayer, which is really unique clone of Black Rose by Royal Kush. So Black Rose by Royal Kush is from fig seeds in Santa Cruz. Really interesting thing. He's been growing them in his backyard all the way to like F12, F13 generations. But we're talking about a plant that finishes pretty fast, has incredible purple expression with a very unique bud structure, and are mostly tall, like medium stretch, like average plants, and should be irrigated to grow to get good bud sizes. We didn't see like big bud trait from this plant, um, but incredible amount of purple expression, really cool terps. We're absolutely loving this cross. If you get your hand on a pack, you guys are really gonna enjoy it. Um, okay, so another general question: when you grow a new strain for the first time, do you do any training or topping? No, I don't like to. I like to have the plant just show me exactly how it grows normally, or I do any training or topping. That said, everyone has limitations in their grow. And if you have like a plant that's double the size of the other plants in your grow, it's not going to grow well. And we have seen that like if you're hunting if you're doing a new clone, and let's just say you have two clones, like clone A and clone B, and you're growing them at the same time in the same exact cycle. Neither of them got topped, right? And in veg, one is much faster growing than the other and is twice the size of the other, but they're going to get the same irrigation in the same size substrate in the same room. You got to top that tall one. You have to maintain and tame that plant to be able to have a decent expression without the plant just like wilting and dying. So in the end, it's a judgment call, but I like to not train or top the first time I grow and just have the plant show me exactly how it grows. And I think the second time is when I'll go, okay, cool. You know, let's see how it does with topped or trained or trellis or something like that. Okay, Lightning Wolf. Will Mellows be released again? Yes, it will. We're just wrapping up a pollination and we have to see how well it does with the number of seeds, but we should be releasing Mellows again on a re-release. Get excited, guys. That's one of our favorite seed lines of all time. Stay tuned. Keep up with the Discord. We will release more Mellows. Hell yeah. Um, I've been doing low stress training on a plant and I don't really like how it's growing. Can I stop the first and let it grow upwards again? Okay, here's a really interesting lesson in plant uh, expression with flowering, right? Whenever you do low stress training or top the plant, what you're doing is sending a signal of cytokinins in the plant that induce a lot of secondary growth. So if you have auxins, you increase the plant's upward trajectory growth and its apical meristem, taller, reach towards the sun. If you have cytokinins, you're increasing the lateral branching, right? Um, a lot of people try to create a good canopy with low stress training, so that especially the tent grow to maximize the light's penetration. But here's the key: create like a 2 week separation between your last training of the plant and your flip to allow the plant to gain a little bit of like that apical dominance again of like the growth tips just going like normally growing upwards and then flip. And what you're going to see there is a little bit of a more normal expression because what happens is that if you like top, and we've seen this before, we've seen this actually catastrophically. If you like top a plant and then flip it the next day, so you do some canopy maintenance and flip it the next day, you can get some really weird expressions of the plant. You can get like tiny buds. You can get like oddball expression of the flowers and buds. So I definitely recommend having your last training and then let them ride for like 10 to 14 days and then flip them. And you should get a more like normal expression of the plant. So that's a little like life hack for a commercial grower that really makes a difference. Um, how can we get the best out of compound seeds? Do we need a compound recipe for each strain to get the best of it? That recipe won't be 100%, but 80, 90% success. Well, I think that's a great question. Signing on to the server here and asking questions about things like total eclipse. Um, yes, sir, we're getting more mellows, baby. We're doing it. Um, uh, Something like total eclipse. That's going to help a lot in just asking questions. Learning about and paying attention to the profiles of the parents is big too. And typically we try to release the seeds with a description of at least something you should know. Hey, this is a long flowering variety. Hey, this is something it's a slow veg variety. Something like that to try to like guide you in the right direction. So in the very least, if you're getting it from a reseller or like a seed bank, we don't can't always message that. So yeah, message ARC, post on the Discord, uh, email us, get in touch, or sign on to the website, and we should have a description of that will help you guys get the most out of your seed packs. Um, cool. So Lightning Wolf also asked, do fan speeds stay the same throughout the stages of flowering? For the most part, yes. Um, but it's going to depend on how decadent your canopy is. That's a nice little uh, plant world word, decadence. Complexity. How dense is it, right? So your fan speeds definitely need to make sure they're really up to par when you're exposed to like fungal pathogens or high humidities or low, right? Um, And I have seen to great effect growers add more fans late in flower when they're almost in those like powdery mildew danger zones of low VPD and high humidity. More air movement, especially around the bottom of the grow, can really help to mitigate those like little pockets of moist air where PM or bud rot can form. Bud rot also is usually a result of the inequality between the environmental temperature and the bud temperature. Think about these dense buds. Like if all night they get nice and cold, and then you turn the lights on, it's now like a cold bud in a room that's rapidly gaining moisture. You know what that's like? It's like a soda can that's nice and cold that you bring out of the fridge, and it starts to get condensation on it. We have a cold bud in a warm, humid room, and it's now has condensation on it, and boom, it's covered in PM or bud rot. And you go, what happened? Well, if you had better air movement to not have that to be able to evaporate some of the condensation off that and equalize the temperature more quickly, you wouldn't have gotten bud rot. So air movement is really important to prevent stuff like bud rot and PM. So definitely late flower is more important, but I wouldn't say necessarily like change it around all the time. But a floor fan, not above, but like below, oftentimes, or faced up like that in a tent, can do wonders for some late flower prevention of bud rot, especially. Okay, I've been researching cleaning solutions. I'm wondering if you have any experience with PAA, periacidic acid. That's marketed as um, oh, ARC, help me again. Oh, fuck, what is it called? Oxidate or something like that. Oh, anyways. And then hypochlorous acid. There's a lot of clean solutions that have that. I would say use bleach. If you have plastic parts, use bleach. So that's not hypochlorous acid, but that's um, oh no, I'm blanking on the chemical of just bleach, but it's going to be a little more hardcore than hypochlorous acid. Hypochlorous acid is best for in-line treatments or in nutrient solutions and stuff that's going to touch the plant. Um, if the plants are dead and you're just cleaning your room, bleach it, man. Bleach can be corrode metal though. So using things like Phizan or periacidic acid is better for metal parts. So keep that in mind. But yeah, I would just use bleach for most of your cleaning needs, especially if it's like tables, plastic parts. Um, okay, I got your 10 Gs and tiger ties. Awesome. Was curious how closely it resembles jet fuel gelato and gastropop. What are some characteristics? Okay, good question. Tiger's Eye is a lot more like gastropop, and most of them behave quite a bit like gastropop. You're going to see like kind of a shallow bud structure that's like not like pointy like a spear, but like a little more shallow, and it's going to be less stretchy and like medium stretch plant a little bit. Um, Absolutely love the expression we saw out of Tiger's Eye. Awesome bud structure. 10 Gs is a lot like jet fuel gelato. It's stretchy, it's big, it's tall, it's fast veg, it's super vigorous, and you get the buds that are a little more like a triangle shape. Um, so definitely controlling the canopy height of your 10 Gs and potentially topping 10 Gs is a good call. But we saw some 10 Gs testers just be skyscrapers, massive plants. Jet fuel gelato can be like that too. So yeah, 10 Gs is a lot more like jet fuel gelato. Tiger's Eyes is a lot more like gastropop. 10 Gs didn't take as much of the gastropop traits as it did jet fuel gelato. Ah, Kratky method. Oh, okay. How to prevent root rot and other best practices. Okay, so if you guys look up the Kratky method, is a hydroponics. It's also called simplified hydroponics. Um, and it's like growing plants on a float, uh, where you just have like a bin of water, and it's not irrigating it. It's just sitting there, right? Um, so yeah, I would not recommend that for cannabis. If you're talking about like lettuce kicks ass with the cracky methods. You can even grow like ginger and stuff with it, sugarcane. Um, but yeah, preventing root rot with Kratky hydroponics is proper oxygenation and changing of the water, oxygenation of the water, change of the water, and then using something like hypochlorous acid in the nutrient solution. Um, I want to go quickly to back to another question. Um, that's a really important thing again to look up as far as like continuing education. Back to mediums and substrates really quick. Cocoa versus Rockwool, right? One of the most important things that you guys can look up is something called cation exchange capacity. Cations are K, Mg, Na. Cations versus anions. Cations are positively charged, anions are negatively charged. So your main cations for growing plants are the potassium, magnesium, and sodium. But the amount of cations that the substrate can hold onto and give to the plant's roots, vary wildly. Rockwool has a zero. So Rockwool can't give any cation exchange, meaning that all the cations need to be in the nutrient solution at the same time. This is one reason Rockwool is a little easier to get CalMag deficiencies, whereas cocoa is like a 200. Gosh, I wish I knew what that scale meant. Um, but it can hold a hell of a lot more cations than Rockwool. And so therefore it's a little more forgiving and less likely to get like a CalMag deficiency. Um, so as far as perlite is like a 5, so it's like barely can hold on to cations. Peat I think is like a 100 to 150. So that's another important thing to look up or try to learn more about to learn about substrates. Next big drop for compound, Tommy, is menthol remakes. I believe we have menthol seeds coming back, so we're making a bunch of new menthol tests that we're testing. Um, and we're also working on jokers, the jokers pollination. We're very excited about that. Um, okay, let me get back to some of the questions that were submitted. Um, Okay, how you deal with mites and other pests like caterpillars after flowering week 3? Okay, great question. You don't want to use deeper you get into flower, the more treatments are kind of off limits, right? So if you're using like a wettable sulfur, never ever use that during flower. Use it before flowering, but you'll smell the bud and you'll sneeze immediately. It's not good to have it on there, right? Um, Going back to a question earlier, sulfur is actually kind of important, and sulfur amendments are pretty important for terpene expression as well. Doing more research on that. But dealing with mice and caterpillars, I'd say like horticultural oils are still great, but during you can do that during week 3. But I would much prefer using your predatory insects during flowering. During veg and early flowering, you can get away with stuff like your horticultural oils, like neem, stuff like that. But lean on your predatory insects later, guys. That's going to be the best way to prevent insects into flower because they don't affect the quality at all. So it's really the best bet. Um, okay, so collective consciousness. What is desirable amount of internodal space? Is it purely genetics which decides or manipulate this by changing this light spectrum? Um, Different composition of nutrients, smaller graded day night, plant training. Okay, internodal space can absolutely be manipulated. One of the best ways to manipulate it is irrigation technique. Vegetative irrigation, which is a lot like a very moist substrate that you're watering often, will create a lot longer internodes than something that you let dry back quite a bit and you're only watering not so often. That's called a generative irrigation cycle. So it's best to limit how much you water the plant, um, and be careful of this between in the stretch phase of the plant. Like phases like the first 2 weeks of the flowering, you kind of want to be careful about how often you water it, and you want to let it get to somewhat of a dry space before you re-water it. It's going to help a lot. Hot and humid temperatures can help the internodes get longer. Red light helps internodes get longer. So we had a question about blurple lights, and red lights in veg can oftentimes cause an excessively long internodal distance. But a huge part of it is genetics. There's OGs typically have pretty long internodal distance, and you do all you can to like push them together. You might have something like blueberry or papaya that like the internodes are right on top of each other, and you really have to do everything you can to stretch them out. So I do think there's the perfect amount, which is like when there's space between each bud set. So when the bud actually forms and you get one of those colas, it might be cool to look at, but you get what I call a fused cola, where the whole like the buds actually are touching and they're like stacked on top of each other, kind of like an ear of corn or something, right? That's not that desirable to me. Why? Well, when you break the nugs off, this part of it touching the other bud is typically green or doesn't like grow well. So I like to have each bud be a little bit on its own, like instead of touching like that, like boom, and then a little space, and then boom. So just enough space to create a little air and distance between the buds is perfect. But you don't want stem space like that in between each one. It's just a waste of kind of like, growth. So yeah, there's a lot that can affect that, and obviously stuff like topping and load stress training will also change the internodal distance by causing more cytokinins. Okay, 503 King, do you have collabs in the works currently? If so, with who? So we're working with Your Highness to do Shady Apples pollination. We're working with that and Sean on that, which is really exciting. Hopefully, we should get him on here one of these days to talk more about it. So we got a bunch of awesome compound gear across to their Shady Apples, which is Cushman's by Apple Fritter. So it's a really gassy strain. I actually got in trouble with my neighbors by smoking a joint inside my house, and they complained inside their house. And I was like, oh my god, okay, that's stanky bud. So excited about the chirp on these. We are doing we're doing menthol, we're doing jokers, we're doing shady apples, and we're doing some remakes of some grape gas gear. So that's what's in the works right now. Everything else is what we just call discovery pollination, which is going to be like a small run for us to just do testing with. Okay, 503 Kings with compound planning on offering up F2 seeds. The closest thing we do to F2 seeds typically is S1s, which are going to behave a lot like F2s. When we did Gastropop S1, anyone who grew those seen that there's quite a bit of variability with like bud structure, especially. But you might get something really wonky and really interesting. So that's cool. But I prefer like F1 seeds as far as vigor and consistency with two not so related plants. But we have done quite a few like BXs and stuff like that. And so yeah, I don't think we'll do that many F2s except for S1 generations. So yeah. Okay. We have we were saying what books do you recommend on cannabis botany, advanced knowledge, and breeding? I have a couple things here. I am guest. I did write a guest chapter for cannabis cultivation instructions, which is a new. It's called the cannabis CCI book. It hasn't come out yet. I'll give you guys the link when it comes out. But I'm really excited about this book. It has a lot to do with irrigation and commercial growing, and I wrote a chapter on pheno hunting. So that's one thing you can do to solidify a lot of the knowledge we talk about here. Plant empowerment is awesome for greenhouse management. And then I put a link here to Ed Rosenthal's latest version of his book, which is a great reference to learn more about all this. Um, Mike, 1661 is talking about personal safety precautions. No, this is actually dear to my heart. Not too many people ask about this, and I think home growers should know more about this. So I'm going to go and get into it. Um, Eye protection. So we mentioned eye protection. Eye protection is pretty important, guys. These LEDs are meant to grow plants and are not necessarily good for your eye. Protect your eyes in the grow, guys. Especially tent growers, like changing your fans and stuff like that, looking right into a damn LED. Put some sunglasses on. Take care of your eyes. Your freeze yourself will thank you. Um, Gloves and eye protection when using pH up and down is very important. Acids and bases can be dangerous. Watch out. Um, if you're using STS reversal agents or silver nitrate, that is a dangerous chemical. You need to have eye and skin protection, and just be very careful using it. Um, no food or drink in the garden's good. CO2 augmentation can be dangerous. And I'll also say that inhalation of some of the IPM chemicals can be really bad as well. You need to be careful and read the entire label of your IPM chemicals. One of them that's a sleeper I will tell you about is hydrogen peroxide. Hydrogen peroxide, in my opinion, is one of the dangerous chemicals you can just buy at the drugstore. And if you aerosolize it or like use it in a closed space like a tent, it can be super dangerous, guys. Super dangerous. So watch out, be careful of that. Don't spray. Never put hydrogen peroxide in a spray bottle and apply it as a spray. Never ever do that. Um, yeah, and sulfur additives, stuff like that too. It's not that dangerous, but you should be watch out for your lungs and use a gas mask when doing some IPM stuff. Follow the label. Be careful. Some nasty chemicals out there. Um, okay, three more questions on this thing, and then maybe I'll take a couple more if you guys want to stay late. What's your take on high EC throughout the whole run versus ramping through veg and flowering? Um, I think high EC. This is similar to the light intensity. EC should always be reflective of light intensity. Light intensity EC should always like match each other, right? Different strains will have different tolerances to high EC. Some really want high EC the whole time, and some don't want high EC. Um, but I would say it's similar to the light in that like you should have pretty high EC for all of your flowering cycle, except for flush, which you're tapering off between weeks 6 and 9. So lowering EC or just going I much prefer to lower EC gradually between weeks 7, 8, and 9 compared to just high EC all the way to the end and then just flush, which is like no, just straight water. This can be kind of shocking to the plant. I think if you're watering at like a 2.5 EC week 6, week 7 hitting it at like a 2.0, week 8 we hitting it at like a 1.5 or 1.0, week 9 flush. That's a really nice balance. It depends how big your substrate is and how you've irrigated it before and your light intensity. But you do want to taper off that EC down so that the runoff EC is significantly lower towards the end. And that's how you're going to get that good coloration, trichome maturation, bud maturation. How often do you take cuts from your moms? Okay, so it depends how you're growing them and what light intensity they're at. But I prefer to take them every 2 weeks and cut them down pretty hard. So if you're running higher intensity light, you can do it as much as every 7 to 10 days. But I prefer to every 2 weeks with like 500, 300 to 500 ppfd moms hanging out to hit them every 2 weeks or so. And then every other, so uh, if I cut my clones on week 0, a week after that, I'll do a de-leafing and then I'll cut clones again a week later. So that's how I like to treat my moms. And always bottom prune and clean up the bases. And then last question here: can you use vinegar to lower your pH? I would not recommend that. Vinegar acetic acid is a weak acid, and it will leave a residual amounts of vinegar just like in the solution. You don't want that. So just use pH up or pH down. It's the reason the pH up and pH down were made is that the acids and bases dissociate into plant nutrients. So dissociate into either potassium or I'm gonna blank on this. Um, I don't remember. One of them dissociates into potassium, and the other one dissociates into another plant nutrient. So it's kind of like doesn't affect your nutrient solution that much. Don't use vinegar. Um, uh, okay. Well, ARC, Anat, could you help me out? Do you see any good questions on the chat or anything that I should address here? Or stuff we should get into? That's all the stuff we had there. Cool. Yeah. See people asking about Bling Blow a little bit. I saw one submission in the grow, or I saw, I'll get to like just two or three of these ones in the comment. Um, okay,
Also,
so
I
you know,
wanna highlight that we're gonna be selecting 5 submitters and sending them something special by mail, and we're gonna continue doing that
oh,
every month. ARC is gonna reach out to the winners to get your address, and you'll get something in the mail, and you can submit your questions under the Grow Hour link for next time
awesome,
to qualify. Yeah.
killer guys. Okay, cool. So are we doing that giveaway? That giveaway people, so we don't
We're
stay
gonna
over,
do it
or
for today, and we're gonna select from those who submitted questions that were answered this time, and then ARC is gonna post their names under the chat and reach out to them. And also, if you're looking to ask questions, submit them and qualify for the next Grow Hour.
all right, awesome. Okay, so sorry, you're going to do that announcement? Should I continue on to some of these last questions?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, let me get into just a couple of these, and then we'll wrap up. Um, okay, so Space Garden asked upcoming projects, and again, we're most excited about the menthol remakes, guys. We made like 26 crosses for this, so we're doing a ton of testing right now. We, I, I don't know if you guys follow me on Instagram, but I hand planted very daintily about like 800 seedlings for this. Um, so we're very excited on some of these crosses. One of them I'll say I'm seeing right now is a Blue Dream by Menthol. Whoa, what? That's a that's a totally weird oddball uh, cross, but the plants are so vigorous and strong. I'm really excited to see how they come out. We obviously have a lot of our favorite like compound flavors, you know, Jokers and Red Bulls and stuff like that. Mellows cross to our favorite menthol, as well as remaking some of our old ones in very small quantities. Um, but excited about a lot of that. We're also focusing a lot on like OGs there, which is kind of cool. We're trying to bring back some like OG flavors, just gas, not necessarily purple bud, but like gas forward strains. It's one of the reasons we really went back to menthols. We just want that gas back because everything being kind of like the uh purple candy thing, we love that as well. And I love for instance Castor Pop is all about that purple candy. But we also want to just bring more variability and more stuff. Joker's pollination, guys, some absolute heat coming at you. Going back to like the gelato leaning, runts leaning stuff. This is gonna be face melting flavors here. We've already done a lot of testing for, and we have a bunch of new flavors coming from that as well. Um, and then lastly, that Shady Apples one, which I'm stoked on. So we'll be working all of those. I'll get to and then fulvic acid. Fulvic acid, yeah, it's like microbe food, and it definitely seems to increase terpene content, but it is like expensive. So like I would put that. I think last talk I talked a little bit about like the hierarchy of stuff. Like, don't use fulvic acid if you're still struggling with temperature, humidity, irrigation controls, IPM, stuff like that. Like, just focus on getting good, like, fundamentals for growing good weed before you start to add, like, hydrostore products. It's just going to complicate and confuse the heck out of the process. Is not worth it. So I think it's unnecessary unless you're already quite dialed in and you want to kick it up to the next notch. Um, Moldy milk. What strains in your menu are gassy fruit potent yielders for a 3-pack? Anat, maybe you can help me bring up what we have on the menu right now available. I guess that would be compound, or that would be some of the seed banks, or like, what do you think? How would I answer that question about what's, because I don't want to talk about something that's not available.
I think people can look at our website, compound-genetics.com, and we have listed all the affiliated vendors, and you can see what is being sold there. Our store is not active at the moment.
Okay.
And
Well,
please, please, please shop only from affiliated vendors.
yeah,
We hear
don't
daily
ever fall.
about scams.
Yep, so many out there. Well, let's say anything from the apples and bananas line, you get a lot of fruit and gas that yield, so that's really awesome. Anything from the gastropop line, you're also going to get that. So if you can still get your hands on Total Eclipse, if you can still get your hands on Double Up, whew, Double Up is some really fire gear, guys. Don't sleep on that. Um, what strain of your bread is giving you the strongest, most unique flavors? You know what? I'm gonna bring up banana cream pop. If anybody got that from the Gastropop line, I recently just did a pheno hunt and reviewed one of those, and the amount of different flavors and expressions from that is truly mind blowing. It's an awesome cross. If you can find it, or if you have it already, don't sleep on that one. It's really awesome. Um, I would also say some of the stuff from apples and bananas line, for instance, exotic squared um, facade, those are some really heavy hitters as far as unique flavor. And the pave line, if you like gas and cream and menthol flavor, that's pretty damn awesome too. So I guess I'm just advertising all over gear at that point. um, and I was going to talk about gastropop line with the most variation. Banana cream pop is up there. Um, I would say variation wise as well. Um, I know. Persimmon. Persimmon is really all over the place and has a ton of interesting expressions. You don't know what you're going to get from each seed. So if you can still get your hands on persimmon, check that out. It's a really cool one. And then last question I'll do is Scholar here. How do you get your palate ready for a good taste test? Um, One like hack a lot of people use is coffee. So you get like not a cup of coffee, but like a bag of coffee, and it like resets your palate. So if you smell one jar and then you smell the coffee and smell another jar, you kind of like have a new. It's like you smell it for the first time. So that's one way to kind of like keep yourself fresh. Um, if you're smoking them, I think it's a little harder. But again, having like beverages and then taking a break where you're able to kind of reset your palate and like clean out a little bit is really good. If you're just gonna hit like 5 joints in a row, the fifth one is never gonna be as flavorful. Um, Coffee resetting your aroma as well as just drinking water and beverages that helps a lot. Um, yeah, and taste testing is a whole nother can of worms to standardize. It's not so easy, but I think that kind of wraps it up, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming out today. I love doing this with you guys, and I love all your questions. You guys are the best.